At my 13th birthday dinner, my mom's friend gripped my hand and whispered, "What happened to your twin wasn't your fault." I laughed. My fault for what? That she got a scholarship to a boarding school in Switzerland? Miss Killerself's face went completely white. She pulled her hand back like she'd been burned, mumbling something about needing to find my mother. The thing was, everyone had been acting strange all night. When Dad made his toast, his voice cracked on, "Proud of the young woman you're becoming," and Mom had to take over. My grandmother kept touching my face and tearing up for no reason. Even my cousins were being nice to me, which never happened. I found Dad in the garage pretending to organize his tools. He always did that when he was upset. "Dad, why is everyone acting so weird about Kitty? Is this about when I was jealous that she got into that fancy boarding school? I apologized for that months ago." He went completely white, whiter than Miss Killerself had been. His wrench clattered to the concrete floor. "Sweetheart, what do you remember about when Kitty left? She got the scholarship last year, went to Switzerland. We drove her to the airport." Even as I said it, something felt wrong about the memory, like trying to remember a dream. My father, who I'd never seen cry, not even when Grandpa died, was sobbing against his workbench. "You were asleep. You didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to what?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Please find your mother. Please." He wouldn't look at me. I ran through the house, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. Mom's bedroom door was locked. I could hear her on the phone. She doesn't remember doing it. She thinks Kitty's still. I pounded on the door. "Mom, open up! What is everyone talking about?" The door opened and Mom's face was destroyed. Mascara streaking down her cheeks, her lipstick smeared. "It wasn't your fault. You were asleep. You were just asleep." "What wasn't my fault? Let me call Kitty." She sobbed harder, her whole body shaking against mine. I pushed away and called Kitty with trembling fingers. With each time it went to voicemail, my mom tried harder to grab the phone. So I went to the bathroom and called my brother. "Everyone keeps saying I did something, that it wasn't my fault. What did I do to Kitty?" Dead silence. Then, "You really don't remember?" "Remember doing what?" I was screaming now. "Where are you?" "Home. Mom and Dad are having breakdowns about something I supposedly did to Kitty. Don't call the school. Don't look for her online." "Why would I? She's at boarding school. She sends letters every week." Another long pause. "I'm coming home now. Just wait for me." 20 minutes later, my brother pulled me out to his car. His hands were shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. "Everyone says I did something to Kitty but won't tell me what." He wouldn't look at me. "Do you remember the locks on your bedroom door?" He finally asked. "The safety locks?" "Yeah, Mom installed them last year. They lock from the outside." I felt my stomach drop. "What?" "Every night for the past year, Mom or Dad locks you in your room after you fall asleep." "That doesn't make sense." "Why would they?" "Do you remember having nightmares? Night terrors?" Something cold was creeping up my spine. Sometimes, but everyone has nightmares." "You were sleepwalking. Bad, like really bad. You'd wake up in random parts of the house with no memory of how you got there." "Okay, so? Lots of people sleepwalk." He finally looked at me and his eyes were red. "The night Kitty left for boarding school. Do you actually remember driving her to the airport?" "Stop it." I was crying now. "Why are you doing this?" "Because there was no plane." His voice broke. "There was no airport. There's no boarding school in Switzerland. Then where is Kitty?" He turned away again, and I saw tears rolling down his cheek. "That night, the night you think she left, you were sleepwalking. You and Kitty were in your room. Something happened during your episode. You pushed her." "Pushed her where?" My voice was so small I could barely hear it. "Out your bedroom window. The one Mom nailed shut after." The world stopped making sense. "But that's the second story." "Yeah, but she sends letters. Mom reads them to me every week. Mom writes them. Dad helps sometimes. They've been pretending for a year because," he took a shaky breath, "because when you woke up, when the ambulance came, you had no memory of it. And when they tried to tell you the first time, you completely broke down. You hurt yourself. Bad. The therapist said your mind couldn't process it, so it created false memories to protect you." "I killed my sister?" No, listen to me." He grabbed my shoulders. "You had a parasomnia episode. Your body did something while your mind was completely unconscious. It wasn't you. I want to see her room. It's locked. Has been for a year. I know where Mom hides keys." 10 minutes later, I was in Kitty's untouched room reading her diary. The last entry was the night she died. "I have to tell someone the truth about what OP does at night. Mom's been lying to everyone. She knows exactly why this is happening." I read the words again. "Mom's been lying to everyone. She knows exactly why this is happening." My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The diary felt too heavy, like it weighed more than it should. I looked up at my brother standing in the doorway, and his face told me everything. He knew. Whatever Kitty was going to tell someone, he already knew about it. I stood up fast and the room spun a little. What did Mom lie about? What did she know? My voice came out louder than I meant it to. My brother stepped inside and closed the door behind him, which made my chest feel tight. He sat down on Kitty's bed next to where I'd been sitting and put his head in his hands for a second. Then he looked at me and his eyes were red and tired. For months before it happened, your episodes were getting worse. Way worse than anyone told you. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something. Mom was writing everything down. Every episode. Every time you did something violent in your sleep. She kept a journal and hid it from everyone. I felt cold all over. What do you mean violent? He turned his phone toward me and I saw a photo of handwritten pages. Mom's handwriting. I grabbed the phone and started reading. The first entry was dated 8 months before Kitty died. OP woke up screaming again tonight. Found her in the hallway with a kitchen knife. She didn't know how she got there. Didn't remember leaving her room. Took the knife away and she looked right through me like I wasn't there. Put her back to bed. Can't tell anyone. They'll take her away. My stomach hurt reading it. I scrolled to the next photo. OP attacked me during an episode last night. Scratched my arms trying to get past me. She was saying things that didn't make sense. Something about needing to fix it. She didn't recognize me. When she woke up, she had no memory. Found blood under her fingernails. My blood. I'm scared, but I can't report this. Social services will separate the girls, or they'll put OP in a hospital. I can handle this myself. I couldn't breathe right. I attacked you? I attacked Mom? My brother nodded. You don't remember any of it. That's how the parasomnia works. Your body moves, but your brain isn't awake. You were asleep the whole time. I kept scrolling through the photos. There were dozens of entries. Mom documenting every episode. Every violent thing I did while asleep. Every time she had to stop me from hurting myself or someone else. And she never told anyone. Never told doctors. Never told Dad. Just wrote it all down and tried to handle it alone. The last entry was 2 days before Kitty died. Episodes getting worse every night now. OP tried to open Kitty's bedroom door while sleepwalking last night. I heard her and stopped her. She was saying, I have to make her leave. She needs to go away. I don't know what to do anymore. The locks aren't enough. But if I tell someone, they'll take both my daughters from me. I just need to watch more carefully. I can keep them both safe. I dropped the phone on the bed. My whole body felt wrong, like my skin didn't fit anymore. Mom knew I was dangerous. She knew I could hurt someone and she didn't get me help. The words came out flat and dead. My brother picked up his phone. She was scared. She thought if she told anyone, you'd be taken away. Or locked up somewhere. But Kitty died. I was yelling now. Kitty died because Mom was too scared to tell the truth. This wasn't just an accident. This was preventable. Something broke inside me. I felt it crack open like ice. All those months, Mom watched me get worse and wrote about it in her secret journal instead of taking me to a real doctor. All those episodes she documented and hid. She knew, and Kitty died anyway. I started crying so hard I couldn't see. My brother grabbed me and pulled me against him and I sobbed into his shirt. I've been so mad at her, he said quietly. For a whole year I've been angry and I didn't know how to tell anyone. I knew what she did. I knew she hid all those episodes. But I couldn't say anything because everyone was already destroyed. I pulled back from him. Where are the journal pages? The real ones? He pointed at his phone. I took pictures before Mom could hide them completely. She kept the journal in her closet. I found it a few months after Kitty died. I grabbed the phone and started sending the photos to myself. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely type. When they finished sending, I ran downstairs. I could hear Mom in the kitchen. She was probably making dinner like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't spent a year lying to everyone. I printed out the journal pages on the printer in Dad's office. The machine made loud noises and spit out sheet after sheet of Mom's handwriting. All her secrets. All her documentation of how dangerous I was. All the help she didn't get me. I grabbed the pages and walked into the kitchen. Mom was at the counter chopping vegetables. She looked up when I came in and her face went white when she saw what I was holding. Sweetheart, where did you get those? I threw the pages at her. They scattered across the kitchen floor and counter. You knew. You knew I was getting worse and you didn't do anything. Mom's knife clattered into the sink. She bent down and started picking up the pages with shaking hands. I was trying to protect you. I couldn't let them take you away. You let Kitty die instead, I was screaming. You were so scared of me getting real help that you just watched me get worse. You wrote it all down like some kind of science experiment, but you didn't actually do anything. Mom collapsed against the counter. Her whole body was shaking. I was terrified. I thought if I told the doctors they'd put you in an institution, or social services would separate you and Kitty. I thought I could handle it. I thought the locks would be enough. The locks weren't enough. Kitty is dead. The garage door slammed open and Dad ran in. What's going on? I can hear you from outside. He looked at me, then at Mom, then at the papers all over the floor. He picked one up and started reading. I watched his face change as he understood what he was looking at. What is this? His voice was quiet. Too quiet. Mom was crying now. Mascara running down her face again just like at my birthday. I should have told you. I know I should have. But I was so scared of losing both of them. She looked at Dad and her face was broken. The episodes were getting so much worse. She was violent. She attacked me. She was trying to get to Kitty's room. I documented everything, but I didn't tell you because I thought I could manage it myself. I thought if I just watched carefully enough, if I just locked the doors at the right times, I could keep everyone safe without anyone having to know how bad it really was. Dad's face went completely blank. Not angry, not sad, just empty. He dropped the paper he was holding and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Mom followed him. We need to talk about this. Please. Dad didn't say anything. He just walked through the garage and got in his car. Mom ran after him, but he was already backing out of the driveway. She stood there in the driveway crying and calling his name, but he drove away. I stood in the kitchen surrounded by the scattered journal pages. All of Mom's secrets spread out on the floor. All the proof that she knew and didn't help. All the evidence that Kitty's death wasn't just a terrible accident, but something that could have been stopped if Mom had been brave enough to tell the truth. My whole family was built on lies. Mom lying about my episodes. Mom and Dad lying about Kitty being in Switzerland. Everyone lying to me about what I did. Lies stacked on top of lies until the whole thing collapsed. An hour later, my brother found me sitting on the floor of Kitty's room again. I'd gone back there because it was the only place that felt real. Everything else in the house was fake. But Kitty's room was frozen exactly how she left it, so at least it was honest. There's more you need to know about that night. My brother sat down on the floor next to me. I was home when it happened. My stomach dropped. You were there? He nodded. I heard Kitty scream. I ran to the window and I saw you standing at your bedroom window looking confused, and Kitty was on the lawn below. His voice cracked. You were just standing there at the open window in your pajamas looking around like you didn't know where you were. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. I looked right at you through the window and you looked back at me and you said, "Where's Kitty?" Just like that. Completely calm. Like you were asking where she went. But she was right there. She was on the ground right below you, and you couldn't see her or didn't understand what you were seeing. He wiped his eyes. I ran downstairs and outside and Mom was already there screaming. Dad came running out. The neighbors called an ambulance. And you came downstairs still looking confused and you tried to run to Kitty, but the paramedics had to hold you back. You were fighting them and screaming, "Let me help her. She needs me." But you didn't understand that you were the reason she needed help. I had no memory of any of this. The whole night was just blank. A black hole where memories should be. How can I not remember? My voice was tiny. How can something that big just be gone? My brother put his arm around me. Your brain couldn't handle it, so it made up a different story. One where Kitty went to Switzerland and you drove her to the airport and everything was fine. The blank space in my mind felt like proof that I was broken. Not just my sleep, my whole brain. Something so wrong inside me that it could erase my sister's death and replace it with fake memories of airport goodbyes. Downstairs, I could hear Mom on the phone. Her voice was high and desperate. "Please come back. Please. We need to figure this out together. I know I destroyed everything. I know I should have told you. I know I made the wrong choice. But please don't leave us. Don't leave her. She needs you. I need you. Please." Her voice broke into sobs. She left the message and then I heard her dial again. And again. Calling Dad over and over even though he wasn't answering. I sat on Kitty's floor listening to Mom beg Dad to come home and knowing he probably wouldn't. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Our family was splitting apart because of secrets and lies and the things I did while I was asleep. And somewhere in my broken brain was a memory I couldn't access of the moment I killed my twin sister. My brother helped me stand up and we left Kitty's room together. He locked the door behind us and put the key back where Mom hides it. I went to my bedroom and he followed me in, sitting on the floor while I climbed into bed. He asked if I wanted him to stay, and I nodded because I was scared to be alone. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling, but I could tell he wasn't really reading anything. I lay there staring at my ceiling with the nailed-shut window in my peripheral vision. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kitty falling. Except I didn't actually see it because I have no memory of it. My brain was just making up images to fill the blank space. Around midnight, my brother fell asleep on my floor, but I stayed awake. I grabbed my phone and started searching. I typed in parasomnia and sleepwalking and violence. The results were worse than I expected. I found a case about a man who drove 15 miles while asleep and killed someone. He was found not guilty. I found another about a woman who attacked her husband with a knife during a sleep episode. Not guilty. I found a father who hurt his child. Not guilty. The legal system said these people weren't responsible because they were unconscious. But then I started reading the comments under the articles. The victims' families wrote about how legal verdicts didn't bring their loved ones back. Someone wrote that it didn't matter if the person was asleep because their family member was still dead. Another person said the not guilty verdict felt like saying their loss didn't matter. I read comment after comment from people whose lives were destroyed by someone else's parasomnia. They were angry and hurt, and they didn't care about brain malfunctions or medical conditions. They just knew someone they loved was gone. I put my phone down and stared at the ceiling again. The sky outside my window started getting lighter. I never slept at all. The next morning, I heard the doorbell ring. Mom answered it, and I heard Miss Killerself's voice from downstairs. She sounded angry. She said she needed to talk to Mom right now. I got up and walked to the top of the stairs where I could hear better. My brother was still asleep on my floor. Miss Killerself said she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when she knew what really happened. She said lying to me for a whole year was cruel. Mom tried to get her to come inside and talk quietly, but Miss Killerself's voice got louder. She said I deserved to know the truth, so I could properly deal with losing my sister. She said everyone walking on eggshells and maintaining this fake story about Switzerland was making everything worse. Mom started crying and said Miss Killerself didn't understand how bad it was when they first tried to tell me. She said I had a complete breakdown. She said I tried to hurt myself really bad. She said the therapist Evangeline Booth told them my mind couldn't handle knowing what I did. Miss Killerself said living a lie was worse than facing painful reality. She said I would never heal if I was living in a fake world where my sister was just away at the school. Mom said she was trying to protect me. Miss Killerself said she was protecting herself from having to deal with my grief. I sat down on the top step and put my head against the railing. Miss Killerself was right. Living the lie was worse. But the truth was also destroying me from the inside out. I didn't know which was worse anymore. Dad didn't come home that night or the next day. Mom called him over and over, but he didn't answer. I heard her leave voicemails begging him to come back. My brother stayed home from college to be with me. We didn't talk much. We just existed in the same space. 2 days after he left, Dad finally came home. He looked like he hadn't slept. His clothes were wrinkled and he had stubble on his face. He asked where I was and Mom pointed upstairs. He came to my room and sat on my bed next to me. He said he was sorry for leaving when I needed him. He said he had to process his own anger at Mom. He said he was also angry at himself for not noticing the warning signs. He said he should have pushed harder for doctors and specialists before something terrible happened. He said he needed to work through all that before he could be present for me. I asked him if he hated Mom now. He said no, but he was really mad at her choices. He said they had a lot to work through together. He asked if I hated Mom, and I said I didn't know what I felt anymore. Everything was too big and confusing. Dad said we were going to get help. Real help this time. Not just Mom trying to handle everything herself. That afternoon, Dad called a family meeting in the living room. Me, Mom, my brother, and Dad all sat together. Dad said we needed professional help immediately. He said not just for me, but for all of us to process what happened and what had been happening. He said we couldn't do this alone anymore. Mom agreed, but she looked scared. I could tell she was afraid of what therapists might say about her choices. I understood that fear because I was afraid of what they'd say about me too. Dad already had his phone out looking up therapists. He said he was calling someone today. No more waiting. No more trying to handle this ourselves. Mom nodded and wiped her eyes. My brother sat quietly, but I could see relief on his face. Dad found a therapist named Clara Donaldson who worked with trauma and grief. He called and explained our situation. I don't know what he said exactly, but he talked for a long time. When he hung up, he said Clara could see us in 2 days for an emergency appointment. Mom spent the next 2 days trying to prepare me. She said we would have to talk about everything honestly now. She said I would have to say out loud what happened. I felt sick thinking about sitting in a room and saying I killed my sister. Even though I knew it was true now, saying it out loud felt impossible. The day of the appointment came too fast. We all got in the car together. Nobody talked during the drive. Clara's office was in a regular building with other offices. We sat in the waiting room until she came out to get us. She was younger than I expected. She had us all come into her office and sit down. There was a couch and some chairs. She explained that today we would each describe our version of events without interruption. She said this was important for understanding where everyone was coming from. She started with Dad. He talked about the night it happened and finding out later that Mom had been hiding things. Then Mom went. She cried through most of it, talking about being scared and not knowing what to do. Then my brother described hearing the scream and seeing me at the window. Then it was my turn. I had to admit I had no real memories of that night. Just the false ones I created about the airport. Just the facts people told me after. I said I didn't remember pushing Kitty or seeing her fall or anything. Clara said dissociative amnesia was common in cases of extreme trauma. She said my brain protected itself by erasing something it couldn't process. Clara turned to Mom and asked her to explain her choices over the past year. Mom described her fear and desperation. She talked about watching me try to hurt myself after they first told me. She said she genuinely believed she was protecting me by creating the Switzerland story. Listening to her made me feel angry and sad at the same time. She really thought she was helping me. But her help came at the cost of truth and getting me proper treatment. My brother spoke up without being asked. He said he'd been having nightmares about that night. He said he felt guilty for not doing more to help Kitty or stop what was happening. He said he'd been carrying this for a year and it was eating him up inside. Clara looked at all of us and said we were all carrying different pieces of trauma and guilt. She said we needed to stop protecting each other from reality. She said the protection was actually making things worse. Near the end of the session, Clara said she wanted to refer me to her colleague Rosie Donaldson. She said Rosie worked with sleep disorders like mine. She said I needed a proper sleep study and treatment plan before anything else. The idea of being monitored while I slept made my stomach hurt, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't let this happen again. I couldn't hurt anyone else while I was asleep. Clara scheduled our next family session and gave Dad Rosie's contact information. We left her office and got back in the car. Nobody talked on the drive home either, but something felt different. Like we'd finally started dealing with reality instead of hiding from it. Dad called Rosie's office the next morning and got me an appointment for that afternoon. The waiting room had calming paintings on the walls and soft music playing, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Rosie came out to get me herself. She was younger than Clara, maybe in her 30s, with red hair pulled back in a ponytail. She shook my hand and led me back to her office alone. Mom wanted to come, but Rosie said she needed to talk to me first. Rosie had me sit in a chair across from her desk, and she pulled out a folder with my name on it. She explained that Clara had sent over notes about my situation, and that she specialized in sleep disorders like mine. She used the word parasomnia and wrote it down so I could see how it was spelled. She said my type was rare but not unheard of and that there were treatments available. She pulled out diagrams of the brain and showed me the parts that control sleep and wake cycles. She pointed to areas and explained how sometimes the signals get mixed up, how my body could be moving and active while my brain was still in deep sleep. She said what happened to Kitty wasn't a choice I made but a malfunction, like a computer glitching. But then she stopped and looked right at me. She said she needed me to understand something important. She said that even though it was a medical condition, even though I was unconscious, Kitty was still gone. She said I could hold both truths at the same time. I wasn't a bad person, and I didn't choose to hurt anyone, but my sister was still dead because of my actions. Hearing her say it so directly made my chest tight. She didn't try to make me feel better or tell me it wasn't my fault in that soft way everyone else did. She just stated the facts. I appreciated that, even though it hurt. Rosie said we needed to do a sleep study to understand exactly what was happening in my brain during episodes. She explained I would spend a night at the hospital where they would hook me up to monitors and record everything. She said her colleague worked there and would handle the study personally. She pulled out a calendar and we scheduled it for the following week. She gave me a packet of information to read and told me to write down any questions I had. The appointment lasted an hour, and when I came out, Mom was still in the waiting room biting her nails. The week before the sleep study dragged by. I read the packet Rosie gave me about 15 times. It explained all the wires they would attach to my head and chest and legs. It said the room would have cameras recording me all night. It said most people felt weird sleeping in a hospital, but that the data was important. Mom packed me a bag like I was going to camp. Dad drove me to the hospital on the night of the study. We checked in at the front desk, and a nurse led us to a room that looked almost normal except for all the equipment. There was a regular bed and a TV and a chair, but one wall was entirely made of glass with a room behind it full of computers and monitors. The nurse introduced me to Nolan. He was tall with gray hair and glasses. He shook my hand and explained what would happen. He said he would attach electrodes to my scalp to measure my brainwaves and bands around my chest to track my breathing and sensors on my legs to record any movement. He said it would feel weird but wouldn't hurt. It took almost an hour to get everything attached. The wires from my head connected to a box on the nightstand. Nolan said I could move around but to be careful not to pull anything loose. He said to try to sleep normally, which seemed impossible. Mom and Dad had to leave at 9. Mom hugged me 3 times before finally going. Nolan said he would be in the observation room all night watching the monitors. He said if I needed anything to just call out. I changed into my pajamas and got into bed. The electrodes on my head itched. I could see Nolan through the glass wall sitting at a desk with multiple screens. I tried to read but couldn't focus. I turned off the light around 10:30 and lay there staring at the ceiling. The room was too quiet. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I remember is Nolan gently shaking my shoulder. Sunlight was coming through the window. He said good morning and started removing the electrodes. I asked him if anything happened, and he said we would review everything together after breakfast. A nurse brought me eggs and toast. My hair was sticky from the gel they used to attach the electrodes. After I ate, Nolan had me come into the observation room. He pulled up video footage on one of the screens. He said I had an episode around 2 in the morning. He pressed play. I watched myself sit up in bed. My eyes were open, but they looked wrong, empty. I got out of bed and walked to the door. I tried the handle, but it was locked for safety. I stood there pulling on it for almost a minute. Then I walked back to bed and lay down. The whole thing I looked awake. But Nolan said the brainwave data showed I was in deep sleep the entire time. Watching it made me feel sick. That thing that looked like me but wasn't really me. Nolan let the video play longer. I thrashed in the bed for a while, my arms flailing. At one point I sat up and seemed to be looking right at the camera, but my face was blank. Nolan stopped the video. He pulled up charts and graphs showing my brain activity. He pointed to spikes and valleys and explained what they meant. He said I had severe parasomnia with violent tendencies during episodes. He said the good news was that medication could help reduce the frequency and intensity. He wrote out a prescription and explained I would need to take it every night before bed. He said it might take a few weeks to find the right dosage. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He said I would need to sleep in a controlled environment with safety measures for the foreseeable future. He said possibly years. He said we couldn't risk another incident. I asked him if I would ever be normal again, and he paused before answering. He said I could live a full life with proper management, but that this was a chronic condition I would have for a long time. Mom and Dad picked me up from the hospital, and we stopped at the pharmacy to fill the prescription. That afternoon, Dad made phone calls to contractors. By the next day, workers were at our house measuring my bedroom. They installed padding on the walls near my window. Thick foam covered in vinyl that looked like something from a mental hospital. They put alarms on my door that would sound if I opened it while the system was armed. They mounted cameras in 2 corners of my room with night vision capability. Mom tried to make it seem less scary by letting me pick the color of the padding. I chose gray because it seemed less obvious than white. The installation took 3 days. I slept on the couch while they worked. When they were done, my room looked like a padded cell. The window was already nailed shut from before, but now it had bars installed too. Dad set up the camera system on his phone so he and Mom could watch me from their bedroom. He showed me how it worked. I could see myself on his screen from 2 different angles. Mom bought new bedding to try to make the room feel normal, but nothing could hide what it really was. A cage to keep me from hurting anyone else. I stood in the doorway looking at my transformed room and felt the weight of what my life had become. This was my reality now. Medication and monitoring and padded walls. Dad put his hand on my shoulder but didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. I had already missed a week of school during all the appointments and the sleep study. Mom wanted me to wait longer, but I insisted on going back. Walking into school that Monday felt like everyone was staring at me. My best friend met me at my locker. She asked if I was okay and I didn't know how to answer. I said I was dealing with some medical stuff. She nodded but looked uncomfortable. At lunch, I sat at our usual table and the conversation felt forced. People kept glancing at me and then looking away quickly. I heard whispers in the hallway between classes. Someone said my name and then stopped talking when I walked by. I knew rumors had spread about why I was absent. Small town, everyone knows everything. By the end of the day, I felt exhausted from pretending everything was fine. The next morning, the school counselor called me to her office over the intercom during second period. She had me sit down and offered me water. She said the administration knew about my situation and had protocols in place to support me. She emphasized that I wasn't in trouble and that they wanted to help. But the way she said it, the careful word choices, made me feel like everyone saw me as dangerous. She said I could come to her office anytime I needed a break. She said my teachers had been briefed and would make accommodations if I needed them. She asked if I felt safe at the school, and I said yes, even though I didn't know if that was true. She asked if I felt safe at home, and I said yes to that too. She made me promise to tell her if anything changed. When I left her office, I felt marked, different, like everyone knew something was wrong with me. That week, we had another family therapy session with Clara. She said it was time to start addressing Kitty directly, instead of talking around her. She said we needed to talk about our memories of her and our grief over losing her. This was the first time we were allowed to openly mourn her, instead of pretending she was in Switzerland. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Clara had us go around and each share a favorite memory. Dad went first. He talked about teaching Kitty to ride a bike and how she fell 7 times but kept getting back on. Mom couldn't even start. She just broke down completely, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. My brother talked about how Kitty used to leave him notes in his backpack before school. Clara let us sit in the grief for a while without trying to fix it or move on. Then it was my turn. I shared a memory of Kitty and me planning our future together. We were going to be roommates in college and get an apartment with a balcony. We were going to adopt a dog together and name it something ridiculous like Sir Fluffington. We had it all planned out. Saying it out loud made me realize I stole her future even though I didn't mean to. She would never go to college or get an apartment or adopt a dog. Clara stopped me there. She said I needed to understand something. She said I could hold 2 truths at the same time. I wasn't morally responsible because I was unconscious when it happened. But Kitty was still dead because of my actions. Both things were true and I had to learn to live with both. She said trying to deny either truth would keep me stuck. My brother spoke up without Clara asking him to. He said he had been angry at me even though he knew it wasn't fair. He said he knew I was asleep and didn't mean to do it, but part of him was still mad that I got to keep living, and Kitty didn't. Hearing him say it out loud actually helped because it was honest. Clara asked him to say more. He talked about feeling guilty for being angry and feeling angry about feeling guilty. He said it was all mixed up in his head. Clara let him talk without interrupting. She said his feelings were valid even if they weren't logical. She said he could be angry at the situation without being angry at me as a person. We both ended up crying. Clara handed us tissues and let us sit there crying together. Then Dad started talking. He said he had been having intrusive thoughts about what he could have done differently. He said he kept replaying the months before it happened, looking for signs he missed. He wondered if he should have noticed Mom's secret journal entries, or insisted on more aggressive treatment earlier. He said he lay awake at night thinking about all the what-ifs. Clara stopped him. She said guilt was only useful if it led to different future choices, not if it just created suffering. She said we couldn't change the past no matter how much we analyzed it. She said the only thing we could control was what we did moving forward. She made Dad say out loud that he couldn't have known what would happen. He struggled with it. Clara made him repeat it 3 times before we moved on. The next week, Clara brought someone new to our session. Paula Donaldson walked in carrying a leather bag and introduced herself as a grief counselor. She was Nolan's sister, and she specialized in helping families process death. Clara explained that we'd been working on acknowledging what happened, but now we needed specific tools for healthy grieving. Paula sat across from us and opened her bag. She pulled out pamphlets about grief stages and journals designed for loss. She explained that we'd been unable to grieve properly because of the deception. She said grief needs acknowledgement, and we'd been stuck in a strange limbo where Kitty was both dead and supposedly alive in Switzerland. Mom nodded and wiped her eyes. Paula walked us through exercises for processing loss. She had us each write down one memory of Kitty that we wanted to preserve. Dad wrote about teaching her to ride a bike. My brother wrote about her singing badly in the car. I wrote about how she always shared her dessert with me even when I'd already eaten mine. Paula collected our papers and read them aloud. Hearing our memories spoken by someone else made them feel more real somehow. Then Paula suggested something that made my stomach drop. She said we should hold a private memorial service for Kitty where we could say goodbye properly. The room went silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe because a memorial service meant admitting she was really gone forever. Mom spoke up immediately through tears, saying she needed closure desperately. She said she'd needed it for a year but couldn't have it while maintaining the Switzerland fiction. Dad reached for Mom's hand. My brother stared at the floor. Paula explained that memorial services help families process death by creating a defined moment for goodbye. She said it didn't have to be big or formal, just us acknowledging together that Kitty died and we miss her. Clara asked how I felt about it. I couldn't answer at first because my throat was too tight. Finally, I said it scared me because it made everything final. Paula nodded like she understood. She said that was normal, and the fear didn't mean we shouldn't do it. Over the next few days, we planned the memorial service. Mom wanted it at our house in the backyard where Kitty used to play. Dad agreed and started cleaning up the garden area. My brother helped him set up chairs. Mom insisted that Miss Killerself should be invited because she tried to make us face the truth at my birthday dinner. I didn't want her there at first, but Mom said she deserved to be part of this. She said Miss Killerself had been Kitty's friend too, and had been grieving alone while we all pretended. The hardest part was writing something to say about Kitty. Paula gave me a worksheet with prompts, but every question felt impossible to answer. What did I love most about her? Everything. What's my favorite memory? I couldn't pick just one. What do I want people to know about her? That she deserved to live, and I took that away. I sat at my desk for hours staring at blank paper. My brother knocked on my door and asked if I needed help. We sat together and he helped me write something short. Just a few sentences about loving my sister and being sorry I couldn't remember our last moments together. The morning of the memorial service, I woke up feeling sick. Mom had to help me get dressed because my hands were shaking too much to button my shirt. Dad was in the kitchen making coffee but not drinking it. My brother wore a suit that was too small for him now. We walked outside to the backyard where Dad had arranged chairs in a semicircle. Miss Killerself arrived carrying flowers. She hugged Mom for a long time. Clara and Paula came together. Rosie showed up too, even though we hadn't specifically invited her. Everyone sat down and the backyard felt too quiet. Dad spoke first about Kitty being smart and funny and kind. His voice kept breaking and Mom had to take his hand. My brother talked about how Kitty left him notes in his backpack before school. Mom couldn't speak at all. She just cried into Dad's shoulder. Then it was my turn. I stood up holding my paper and my hands shook so hard the paper rattled. I read my statement about loving Kitty and being sorry. I barely made it through the last sentence before I had to sit down. Everyone was crying now. Paula led us in a moment of silence. We sat there in the quiet backyard, and I felt Kitty's absence like a physical weight. After the service ended, Miss Killerself pulled me aside near the fence. She told me that Kitty talked about me constantly at the school. She said Kitty loved me more than anything and was always bragging about her twin sister. Hearing that somehow made everything worse because it reminded me what I destroyed. Miss Killerself put her hand on my shoulder and said Kitty would want me to forgive myself. I told her I didn't know if I ever could. She said that was okay too and squeezed my shoulder before walking away. The medication Rosie prescribed started working after a few weeks. I had fewer episodes at night and could sleep through most nights without incident. But knowing I was watched on camera every night made me feel like a prisoner in my own room. The red light from the camera blinked constantly in the corner. I couldn't forget it was there watching everything I did. In my next appointment with Rosie, I told her how the camera made me feel trapped. She explained this was necessary for safety and that eventually we might be able to reduce monitoring. She said there were no guarantees though, because parasomnia was unpredictable. I had to accept that I might need cameras watching me sleep for years, or maybe forever. A week later, I had an individual session with Clara without my family there. She asked how I was really doing, and I couldn't lie anymore. I admitted I was having thoughts about whether everyone would be better off if I wasn't here. Clara's face got serious immediately. She said we needed to implement a safety plan right away. She was direct about the fact that losing me wouldn't bring Kitty back. She said it would only add more trauma to an already devastated family. She made me promise to call her if the thoughts got too strong. We wrote out a safety plan together with steps to take when I felt that way. She taught me coping strategies for when the thoughts got overwhelming. We practiced them over and over until I could use them automatically. She made me repeat them back to her 5 times. She said these thoughts were a normal response to unbearable guilt, but acting on them would be another tragedy, not a solution. Mom started seeing her own therapist to address her guilt and the choices she made. She told me one night that she understood if I couldn't forgive her right now. I was honest and said I didn't know how I felt about her anymore. Sometimes I was angry, and sometimes I felt sorry for her, and sometimes both at once. Clara said that ambivalence was okay, and didn't need to be resolved immediately. She said I could have complicated feelings about Mom for a long time, and that was valid. Dad took a leave of absence from work to be more present at home. I noticed he started checking on me multiple times during the night, even though the camera system already monitored me. I'd wake up and see him standing in my doorway just watching me sleep. His hypervigilance was exhausting, but I understood it came from fear of losing another daughter. Sometimes I'd pretend to be asleep when he checked so he wouldn't feel bad about waking me. A few weeks later, my brother came home with his college acceptance letter and sat me down in the living room. He got into a school 3 hours away and would be leaving in the fall. I could see relief in his face even though he tried to hide it. He told me he needed some distance from everything that happened here. It hurt, but I understood why he couldn't stay in this house anymore. We had a session with Clara where she helped us talk about it without anyone getting defensive. My brother admitted he felt guilty for wanting to leave, but he needed space to heal on his own terms. Clara said that was healthy and that we could maintain our relationship even with physical distance. We agreed to do weekly video calls so we wouldn't lose touch completely. I made him promise he'd actually answer when I called, and he said he would. The next week, Detective Griffin showed up at our door asking to speak with my parents. I heard them talking in the kitchen and caught bits about treatment plans and medical documentation. Griffin came into the living room after and sat down across from me. He was kind, but his face was serious when he spoke. He asked how my treatment was going and if I was taking my medication consistently. I told him yes and showed him the pill organizer Mom kept on the counter. He nodded and then said something that made my stomach drop. He explained that my condition made me legally a danger to other people, even though what happened wasn't my fault. He said the case was closed as an accidental death because of my documented parasomnia episode, but he emphasized that any future incidents would be viewed completely differently now. The police and courts knew about my condition and its severity. If something happened again, I wouldn't get the same understanding I got the first time. His warning was harsh, but I knew he was being honest with me. He told my parents they needed to take my treatment seriously, because next time there might not be a next time for our family. After he left, I felt sick thinking about how I was basically on probation for the rest of my life. 2 weeks later, I had a bad setback that proved Griffin's warning wasn't just talk. I went to bed after taking my medication like always. When I woke up the next morning, my room was destroyed. My bedding was torn into pieces and scattered everywhere. My hands were covered in bruises and small cuts. I'd apparently spent part of the night punching the padded walls over and over. The camera footage showed me thrashing around violently for almost an hour. I had no memory of any of it. Mom called Rosie immediately, and we had an emergency appointment that afternoon. Rosie adjusted my medication dosage and added another safety protocol to my nighttime routine. She tried to be encouraging, but I could tell she was concerned. I felt like I was getting worse instead of better despite months of treatment. The progress I thought I'd made seemed meaningless now. That week's family therapy session was when everything I'd been holding in finally exploded out. We were talking about my setback, and Mom kept saying it wasn't anyone's fault. Something in me snapped when she said that. I told her the setback might not be her fault, but Kitty's death absolutely was. Her secrecy killed Kitty just as much as my parasomnia did. If she'd gotten me proper treatment instead of hiding everything, then maybe Kitty would still be alive. Clara didn't interrupt me or try to calm me down. She let me scream and cry and say every angry thing I'd been thinking for months. Mom just sat there with tears running down her face. She didn't try to defend herself or make excuses. She accepted everything I threw at her. Somehow that made it harder to stay completely furious because she wasn't fighting back. After I'd said everything I needed to say, Clara asked Mom to respond. Mom looked directly at me and acknowledged every mistake she'd made. She admitted she knew my episodes were getting dangerous and she chose to hide it because she was scared. She said she thought she could handle it herself, and that decision cost Kitty her life. Hearing her take complete responsibility without any excuses or justifications made something shift inside me. I was still angry and probably would be for a long time, but I could see her as a scared person who made terrible choices instead of just a villain who destroyed our family. She was flawed and human, and those flaws had devastating consequences. Dad spoke up next and admitted his own part in everything. He said he'd been enabling Mom's secrecy by not asking harder questions when things didn't add up. He knew something was wrong, but he let Mom handle it instead of pushing for real answers. He took ownership of being passive when he should have been protecting both his daughters. Watching my parents hold themselves accountable helped me understand that blame wasn't simple. It wasn't just one person's fault or one bad decision. It was layers of choices and fears and mistakes that built on each other. 3 months after the truth came out, my sleep episodes were finally better controlled. I was having more nights of normal sleep without incidents. The medication seemed to be working consistently now. Rosie was cautiously happy about my progress, but she emphasized something important. Parasomnia was a chronic condition I'd have to manage for my entire life. This wasn't something I'd outgrow or cure completely. I'd always need medication and monitoring and safety protocols. That reality was hard to accept, but at least I was being honest about it now. I started going back to the school regularly and even joined a few activities again. But I noticed some parents pulling their kids away when they saw me. They'd make excuses about needing to leave or suddenly remember something else their child had to do. The school counselor helped me practice responses to questions and stares. She taught me how to protect my privacy while still acknowledging reality. I learned to say I had a medical condition without giving details. One day, my best friend asked me directly what happened and why I'd been gone so long. I gave her a simple version about having a sleep disorder that caused an accident. She was supportive and said all the right things. But I could see fear in her eyes when she looked at me now. She started making excuses to not hang out as much. Our sleepovers stopped completely. I had to accept that some relationships would never be the same no matter how much I wanted them to be. Paula suggested something different during our next session. She handed me a blank notebook with a simple blue cover and told me I could write letters to Kitty whenever I needed to. I stared at the empty pages and asked how that would help when Kitty couldn't read them or write back. Paula explained that grief wasn't about getting responses, but about expressing what I needed to say. She told me I could share my treatment progress, my daily life, anything I wanted Kitty to know. The idea felt strange at first, but I took the notebook home, and that night I wrote my first letter. I told Kitty about the medication changes and how the sleep monitoring worked. I described my typical day at the school and which classes I liked. Writing to her felt less lonely than just thinking about her. I could pretend she was listening even though I knew she wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I filled pages with one-sided conversations about everything happening in my life. A few weeks later, I wrote a letter that broke something open inside me. I was remembering the night Kitty and I stayed up late planning our future. We'd decided we'd be roommates in college and get an apartment with a balcony where we could have breakfast. Kitty wanted to study art, and I wanted to study psychology, so we could help people like us. We'd mapped out our whole lives together sitting on her bed with a flashlight after Mom told us to go to sleep. Writing about that memory made me realize Kitty would never go to college or have her own apartment or study art. She'd never get married or have kids or travel or do any of the million things we'd planned. I cried so hard I couldn't see the page anymore. I just kept writing through the tears about all the experiences we'd never share. When I showed Paula that letter during our next session, she said this kind of grief work was necessary. She explained that I wasn't just mourning Kitty's death, but mourning every future moment we'd lost. The college roommate plans, the weddings we'd never be in together, the kids who'd never know their aunt. Paula said I needed to let myself feel sad about all of it instead of just focusing on the night she died. One afternoon, Mom asked if we could talk, and she brought out a cardboard box I'd never seen before. Inside were dozens of letters written on fancy stationery with Swiss postage stamps. Mom explained these were the fake letters she'd written pretending to be Kitty. She wanted to show me how she'd woven real events into the fiction. She opened one letter dated from October and read about Kitty supposedly joining the boarding school art club. Mom explained that in real life I'd joined the art club that month, and she'd used my experience to make Kitty's fake life feel real. Another letter mentioned Kitty being homesick during the holidays, which about me being depressed around Thanksgiving. Mom had taken pieces of our real lives and repackaged them as updates from Switzerland. It was disturbing to see how carefully she'd constructed the lie. Every detail had been thought through and connected to something real. The letters felt like evidence of an elaborate crime. I asked Mom why she kept writing them even after I seemed stable and wasn't having daily breakdowns anymore. She set down the box and admitted she didn't know how to stop once she'd started. Each week made it harder to tell the truth because the lie had grown so big. She'd convinced herself that maintaining my false memories was kinder than destroying them. Mom said she kept thinking next week would be the right time, but next week never came. The lie became easier than the truth. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she knew it was wrong, but she didn't know how to fix it. She'd been trapped by her own deception. Dad took me to visit Kitty's grave on a Saturday morning when the cemetery was quiet. I'd been refusing to go for months because seeing her grave would make everything undeniably real. But I finally felt ready, or at least ready enough. Dad held my hand as we walked through the rows of headstones until we reached hers. Seeing her full name carved in granite made my knees weak. Catherine Marie with the dates underneath. I placed the flowers I'd brought and knelt down on the grass. I told Kitty out loud that I was sorry even though she couldn't hear me. I said I wished I could remember our last conversation, or the last time I told her I loved her. Dad knelt beside me and held me while I sobbed against his chest. He didn't try to make me stop crying or tell me it would be okay. He just let me grieve. While I was kneeling there, I noticed the dates on the headstone and did the math in my head. Kitty had only been 12 when she died. 12 years old. We'd both been so young when this happened. I looked up at Dad and said we were just kids, and he nodded. He told me we were children dealing with something no child should ever face. He said that context mattered even if it didn't fix anything or bring Kitty back. We were 12-year-olds in an impossible situation, and neither of us had the tools to handle it properly. During our next family session, Clara said something that scared me. She told us our family would never go back to how it was before, and that accepting our new normal was part of healing. I wanted to argue that we could fix things and be normal again, but Clara shook her head. She said we could build something meaningful from the wreckage, but it would require constant work and honesty. The old version of our family was gone, and we had to create a new version. She emphasized that this wasn't giving up, but accepting reality so we could move forward. My brother came home for a weekend visit in late spring. He looked different somehow, more relaxed than he'd been in months. Over dinner, he told us he'd been seeing a counselor at college to deal with his trauma from that night. After we ate, he asked if we could talk alone, and we went out to his car like we had on my birthday. He told me the counseling was helping him process what he'd witnessed and how it affected him. Then he admitted something that must have been hard to say. He told me he sometimes resented me even though he knew it wasn't rational. He knew I hadn't been in control during the episode, but part of him was still angry that I'd taken his sister away. I told him that was okay, and that he didn't have to feel guilty about being angry. His feelings were valid even if the situation wasn't my fault. We both cried, and it felt like the first honest conversation we'd had in a year. A few weeks later, Mom and Dad sat me down to tell me they'd started couples counseling. They explained they needed to address the breach of trust between them about Mom's secrecy and Dad's passive enabling. They were honest with me that they weren't sure if their marriage would survive this. Mom's lying had damaged something fundamental between them, and they didn't know if they could repair it. I appreciated their honesty even though the possibility of them splitting up added another layer of instability to my life. Everything already felt so uncertain, and now my parents' marriage might end too. But I was glad they were being truthful instead of pretending everything was fine. 6 months after the truth came out, I was doing better overall, but still had hard days. Some mornings I'd wake up and the guilt would feel so crushing I could barely get out of bed. I'd think about Kitty and everything she'd never experienced, and I'd want to disappear. During one of these hard days, I called Clara, and she reminded me that healing wasn't linear. She said setbacks didn't erase the progress I'd made. She told me I needed to measure improvement in weeks and months rather than days. Some days would be terrible, and that was normal. The goal wasn't to never have bad days, but to have more good days than bad ones over time. She said I was doing better than I realized, even when it didn't feel that way. A few weeks later, Rosie told me about a research study at the hospital looking at parasomnia cases in teenagers. She said they needed people willing to share their experiences and medical data to help develop better treatments. I agreed to participate because it felt like maybe something good could come from what happened to Kitty. The researcher was a woman in her 40s who asked me detailed questions about my episodes and showed me brain scans from my sleep studies. She explained how rare my type of parasomnia was and how cases like mine helped them understand the disorder better. She told me that the safety protocols they were developing might prevent other families from going through what mine did. It didn't make me feel better exactly, but it gave me something to hold on to. The idea that Kitty's death might lead to treatments that saved someone else made the weight slightly easier to carry. After the interview, I filled out forms and signed releases allowing them to use my medical records. Walking out of the research building, I felt like I'd done something useful instead of just being the girl who killed her sister. Mom asked me a month later if I wanted to help sort through Kitty's belongings. She said we didn't have to, but that it might be time to decide what to keep and what to donate. I agreed, even though the thought of going through her stuff made me feel sick. We spent a Saturday afternoon in her room with boxes and trash bags. Mom held up each item and we decided together what to do with it. Kitty's clothes mostly got donated except for a few favorite shirts I wanted to keep. Her books went to the library. Her art supplies I kept because she'd loved drawing and I wanted to remember that about her. We found her collection of hair ties and Mom started crying because Kitty was always losing them and asking to borrow mine. I found her favorite stuffed elephant that she'd had since we were babies, and I held it against my chest while Mom sorted through desk drawers. We talked about memories as we worked. Mom told me about the time Kitty tried to cut her own bangs and ended up with a chunk missing. I reminded Mom about how Kitty used to make up songs about everything she did. The afternoon was painful, but also felt necessary, like we were finally allowed to remember her as a real person instead of a fake boarding school student. In the back of Kitty's desk drawer, I found an envelope with my name on it in her handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was dated 2 weeks before she died. She wrote that she was scared of my episodes and didn't know how to help me. She described waking up to find me standing over her bed with blank eyes and how terrified she was. She wrote that she loved me but was afraid to sleep in the same house as me. She said she'd tried to talk to Mom about it, but Mom kept saying everything was under control. The letter ended with Kitty writing that she didn't know what to do because she didn't want me to get in trouble, but she was too scared to keep pretending nothing was wrong. Reading her words made me realize she'd been suffering too. She'd been trapped in an impossible situation just like everyone else. She'd loved me enough to be afraid for me even while being afraid of me. I showed the letter to Mom and we both cried together on Kitty's bed. Mom said she was sorry for not listening when Kitty tried to tell her how bad things were. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket to keep. At our next family therapy session, Clara said we needed to create a concrete safety plan for the future. She had us write down specific protocols for medication management with exact times and dosages. We established a schedule for regular check-ins with Rosie every 2 weeks, even when I was doing well. Dad wrote down the monitoring procedures and camera system checks he'd do each night. We created a list of warning signs that would mean my symptoms were getting worse, and what steps to take if that happened. Clara made us practice the emergency protocol out loud, so everyone knew exactly what to do if I had a severe episode. Having everything written down in clear steps made the whole family feel more secure. Mom kept a copy of the plan on the refrigerator and another in her purse. Dad programmed emergency numbers into everyone's phones. My brother got a copy to take back to college, so he'd know what was happening at home. The plan didn't make the danger go away, but it made it feel more manageable. Clara also helped us create new family rituals that honored Kitty's memory while letting us move forward. She suggested monthly family dinners where we'd share favorite memories of Kitty. The first dinner was hard because we weren't used to talking about her openly. Dad told a story about Kitty winning her 5th grade spelling bee. Mom shared how Kitty used to leave notes in her lunch bag. My brother talked about teaching Kitty to ride a bike. I remembered how she'd always steal the marshmallows from my hot chocolate. The dinner was sad, but also felt right, like we were finally grieving together instead of separately. We decided to do it on the 15th of every month because that was Kitty's half of our birthday. Clara said these rituals would help us build a new version of family that acknowledged our loss instead of hiding from it. Paula suggested I write a final letter to Kitty telling her about who I was becoming. I sat in my room one night with paper and pen and tried to find the right words. I told Kitty about my treatment and how the medication was helping. I wrote about participating in the research study and how I hoped it would help other kids. I described the family dinners where we talked about her. I told her about the friends who'd stuck by me and the ones who hadn't. I wrote that I was learning to live with what happened even though the guilt would probably never completely go away. I promised her I'd try to live fully enough for both of us. I told her about wanting to study sleep disorders when I got older, so I could help people like me. I ended the letter by saying I loved her, and I was sorry, and I'd carry her with me always. When I showed the letter to Paula, she said it represented an important shift toward acceptance. She said I was learning to hold my grief and guilt without letting them destroy me completely. I folded the letter and put it with the one Kitty had written to me. On what would have been our 14th birthday, Mom, Dad, my brother, and I drove to Kitty's grave. We brought balloons in her favorite color, purple. Standing at her headstone felt surreal because last year on our 13th birthday, I'd still believed she was in Switzerland. Dad went first and said he loved how Kitty always laughed at his bad jokes. Mom talked about Kitty's kindness and how she'd always helped kids who were being bullied at the school. My brother shared how Kitty used to leave encouraging notes in his backpack before big tests. I told everyone how Kitty had been the braver twin and how she'd always stood up for me. We released the balloons together and watched them float up into the sky. It was devastating but also healing to mark the day with honesty instead of lies. On the drive home, nobody talked much, but it felt like we'd done something important. I started 8th grade in September with my medication adjusted and my treatment plan in place. Mom still locked my door every night and checked the camera system. Dad still did his nightly safety checks. I still saw Rosie every 2 weeks and Clara for family therapy once a month. My brother called every Sunday from college. At the school, some kids knew bits of my story and some didn't. I'd learned to handle the questions and the stares. The school counselor checked in with me weekly. I joined the art club because Kitty had loved drawing, and it felt like a way to stay connected to her. I was learning to exist in the world as someone who'd done something terrible while unconscious. The guilt hadn't disappeared and probably never would. Some days it still felt crushing and impossible, but I was building a life around it. I was learning that healing didn't mean forgetting or being okay with what happened. It meant finding ways to keep living while carrying the weight of it. I thought about Kitty every day. I wore one of her bracelets and kept her stuffed elephant on my bed. I was becoming someone who could hold the truth of what happened while still moving forward. It wasn't the life we'd planned when we were little kids dreaming about our future together, but it was the life I had, and I was learning to live it in a way that honored her memory through my continued growth and healing. Thanks for being here till the end. I'm really glad we could share this story together. I hope it brought a little light to your day.